My wife and I like to explore old abandoned properties as a sort of hobby on the weekends. One weekend, we drove by an old house that looked abandoned, and it wasn't posted to keep out, and nothing was locked up like the gate or barn that was adjacent of this old house. There were old farm equipment implements and several outbuildings on this property. The barn doors were wide open, and we entered, being careful not to touch or disrespect someone else's property or belongings. It's hard to explain the feeling we both felt almost immediately upon entering the barn. We walked around inside the barn, and there was some cool old tools and a motorcycle. We took a few pictures inside the barn, and decided that we should probably head home, and we had a creepy feeling, like someone was watching us, but it was obvious there wasn't anyone still living on the property. It was pretty run down, and the doors of the house were all boarded up from the outside. Just before we got to the gate to leave, my wife, using her phone camera, snapped a few pictures. One was of the house from probably about 200 feet, and one of the barn. All the while, we both still had a weird feeling that someone was watching us. As we were driving home, my wife was looking at the pictures she had taken, and all of a sudden, she said, "There was someone there watching us." And she showed me a picture that she took of the house. Sure enough, there was an older gentleman in the upstairs window of the house, and when she zoomed in on him, it was obvious this guy was mad. We continued on our way home, pretty much in awe at what the picture had captured. We were like, well, no wonder we had the feeling someone was watching us, because there was this guy, and he was obviously mad at us for invading his privacy. When we looked back as we were leaving the property, I specifically remember looking at the upstairs windows, and there was nobody visible, so we figured that the old man in the window was a ghost. For one, the house was nailed shut from the outside, which means if there was a real person in the house, he was locked in there, and left with no obvious way to get out. But as we were sitting on our couch at home, looking at the other pictures, it became very obvious, without a doubt, that we had just experienced our very first ghost. Because in one other picture that we snapped in the barn, there was another person, and it was without a doubt a picture of a girl, and her head was on backwards. I'm tripping right now telling you this experience. That's pretty much the end of my story, and to this day we won't even drive by this property, in fear of dragging one of the ghosts home with us. I was playing in the woods and tripped over something solid, found it was a cement circle, and realized it was an underground door. The next day I came back with a crowbar to open, and I'm not going in unarmed. Pull it up, and it's a Cold War era personal bomb shelter that failed. There was a giant crack in the roof. The floor was covered in slime. But what was worse is the walls are covered in writings. This is the end. We must die. And everyone is gone. Then I find the back wall. In a giant red scrawl, "Get out of my home." That's it. I'm out. I sprint up the door and close it. I don't want to know what that was. But I come back the next day. It's burned out. I didn't set a fire intentionally, and I didn't smell smoke leaving. There's an abandoned and boarded up World War II fort in the southern part of Belgium that we often sneak into with the scouts. Getting in there requires scaling a sheer wall, where we placed anchoring points for ropes and climbing gear, next to a relatively busy road. So you're being super quiet, making no light, and cowering every time a car passes by so he doesn't spot you in his lights. The atmosphere is set. The moment you enter it, it's like driving into water. Sound stops, and the entire place is at a constant 14 degrees Celsius, with a slight breeze passing through. The tunnel is barely large enough for me to pass without turning my body sideways. The tunnel is just high enough to work up a decent gait while hunched over. If someone ahead of you blocks a passage for a moment, the breeze stops and it feels like the entire tunnel network takes a breath. Because of the way the tunnels are constructed, they echo in such a way that your own footsteps seem to be coming from behind you. They also seem to take one more step than you do when you stop. Of course, we don't allow the guys and gals to take any source of light in there, so it's pretty scary overall. So, I'm in there, posted as a side passage to ensure everyone takes the same path and doesn't get lost. I go in first, before any of the other climbers arrive, so they don't know there are friendly faces in there to help them. I'm in there for a while, just waiting for the first to come by, when I see a dancing little light coming down the long hallway. I quietly settle back in my nook, and wait for whoever was smart enough to hide some matches and take them away. The light quietly bobs closer, when I realize there aren't any footsteps accompanying it. I poke my head around the corner, just in time to see it disappear. I hear no footsteps still. I settle back and wait some more, when I realize I do hear some scuffling, very faint. Breathing noises, but still very faint. I become aware of a wet heat coming from right in front of me, with a faint smell of person, sweat, dirt. Suddenly, I realize there's someone there, right in front of me, inches from my face. The breathing stops suddenly. Whatever it is aware of me as well. Whatever, or whoever it is, we're both holding our breath, both acutely aware of each other. It takes ages. I'm sitting there, unable to move, speak, or breathe properly. The wet heat passes, and some minutes later, I become aware of very faint light coming from my right side, which soon dissipates and leaves. Sometime later still, I hear the familiar stomping of combat boots coming down the hallway from my left. I stop the person, tell them to keep following the passageway, and take the first right they come to. Out of curiosity, I ask who went in first. No one. He went in first. My buddy and me spent many years crawling through sewer pipes. One day, we were out in the woods, me, him, and another friend. We were deep in the woods. We found some pipes sticking out of a hillside and agreed to explore it. Well, we crawled down this thing a good 600 feet or so on our hands and knees. At times, it gets smaller and we are on our stomachs. Finally, it comes to one of those big manhole rooms, and we get the impression we were under a house. Of course, we also know that in some places manholes will exist in the middle of nowhere for future developments. Anyways, the room has 3 other super small pipes heading off into different directions, like slither on your stomach size. We choose one and make our friend Z go first. We go down about 300 feet, and he shouts back that there's something in the way. He thinks it's a dead animal. But since we are using weak headlamps, he can't tell. We coerce him to climb over it. Then comes me. He's freaking out, saying stuff is all over his clothes, and he didn't know what it was. I climb over the dark lump of refuse. Feels like a body, but not human, not even animal, just alien. Smells bad. Smells horrible. I slide over this nasty stuff, almost puking, My buddy comes next. Same story. We keep going, asking ourselves why we even do this in the first place. Exploration, etc., into the unknown, the forbidden. We crawl another few hundred yards. Z starts complaining about a horrible stench ahead. We can't, for the life of him, get him to continue. He ends up throwing up. We start throwing around the idea of gas of some sort. He says with his headlamp there's something big up ahead. Looks like a body. Human, maybe. We slide backwards quickly until we get to the manhole room. We crawl out quickly. We get into daylight and investigate the stuff stuck to our clothes from the thing we slid over. It's dark. Bloody dark. Refuse dark. Looks like fur. We agree that it was probably a trapped animal. Never go back, ever again. This was in the San Bernardino area, in Southern California. I was inspecting the bridges that run over canals for lead and asbestos. Most bridges that run over canals have a small space on either side of the water to walk, usually small enough that you have to bend over. One bridge appeared to have a small crawl space under it, but once I got inside it opened up into a huge, dark, low-ceiling room that extended back below the highway. I entered alone, ahead of my supervisor carrying my tools and flashlight. As I passed the flashlight over the darkness, about 20 people stared back at me from the back of the room, all standing. I must have ducked out of there immediately, but I clearly remember seeing a nice rug, multiple large couches, a TV, a table with a vase with flowers in it, beds, paintings on the wall, a nice floor lamp, but none of it was powered, and just 20 people living there in the dark. There used to be an old abandoned school in a town by my house. It was heavily boarded up and super hard to get into. Well, a friend and I managed to get inside by climbing up the side of the school via a pipe fire escape combo and slipping through a window on the roof. We explored the basement, which was flooded. It was kinda creepy seeing stairs disappear into water. We had just left the gym when we heard footsteps coming from the doors on the other side of the gym. Scary, especially considering it sounded like it was one person, not another group of explorers like us. And they were blocking our exit back up to the roof, which was the only way out, otherwise was behind us through boarded up doors. They sounded like someone who was walking around and stopping periodically. There was no light coming from that direction, and we couldn't fathom why someone would come into a creepy place like this alone. We waited for the footsteps to stop, then snuck across the gym, peered down the hallways, saw no one, and continued towards the stairs which would lead us back to the roof. Halfway down the hall, we hear someone sprinting behind us, probably 50 meters away or so, down a typical high school hallway. Now, it is mostly dark in there, but there was a small amount of light coming in through the cracks in the window boards. Still, we didn't see anything behind us as we quickly ran up the stairs. We didn't stop until we got back to the 4th floor. We listened for noise. Nothing. Hopped out the window and climbed back down the pipe. As a teen, I was into urban exploration. There was an old ice plant near my house that had burned. I know, ironic. It burned down around 25 to 30 years prior. Anyway, it wasn't really underground, but so overgrown that it felt more or less like it. I go climbing around over and under the mangled concrete and rebar and graffiti for a while, and finally decide I'm done. A couple of days later, I hear about how the police pulled a corpse out of there. Pretty sure I walked right by it and didn't even notice. There's an old half-torn-down school on the airbase outside of my town. The supposedly haunted old grain silos about a quarter-mile away get more attention, but the school is what me and my friends were obsessed with. We had gone in during the day and poked around, finding the typical stuff graffiti teenagers make in places like that, with the anarchy symbol and "All Hail the Zodiac Killer," stupid stuff like that. We wanted to go in at night, but didn't want to break our necks doing it, which ended up being a smart choice, since there were holes in the floor that went all the way down to the basement, which seemed to have just about ankle-deep standing water at the time. We didn't really get freaked out until later, when we went back at night, and as we're psyching ourselves up to go in, some kind of early 90s blue Ford in a gun rack pulls into the empty parking lot. Its lights cut right through the car and made it hard to see much, but it really spooked us. We got out of there, but the truck followed us around the airbase for the better part of half an hour, turning on its high beams and tailgating us, and then turning up their lights completely off and acting like they were tailing us, in spite of it only being the 2 cars on the road at that hour, plus the airbase being, abandoned. We were just glad we were still in the car and not inside when they got there. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the video today, and if you've liked the footage that you've seen here, that's actually all mine from my other channel, where I do urban exploration and abandoned buildings. I go and explore those as a hobby of mine. So if you haven't checked it out yet, and you're into that kind of stuff, please hop on over to my other channel and give it a look, and subscribe while you're there. I'll put the links at the end of this video and in the description. Thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you next time.